If it is not possible to understand these human vanities and to deal with these people as one of the trade, it is wise at least to suggest such understanding, to show interest in their affairs, and to let them believe that really you think it needful for everybody to know how to saddle a horse correctly, or to distinguish the German bird dog from the English setter at 1,000 paces. What is aimed at is not personal respect for the judge, but for the judge's function, which the witness identifies with the judge's person. If he has such respect, he will find it worth the trouble to help us out, to think carefully, and to assist in the difficult conclusion of the case. There is an astonishing difference between the contribution of a sulking and contrary witness and of one who has become interested and pleased by the affair. Not only quantity, but truth and reliability of testimony are immensely greater in the latter case. Besides, the antecedent self-love goes so far that it may become very important in the examination of the accused. Not that a trap is to be set for him, merely that since it is our business to get at the truth, we ought to proceed in such proper wise with a denying accused as might bring to light facts that otherwise careful manipulation would not have brought out. How often have anonymous or pseudonymous criminals betrayed themselves under examination just because they spoke of circumstances involving their capital I, and spoke so clearly that now the clue was found, it was no longer difficult to follow it up. In the examination of well-known criminals, dozens of such instances occur. The fact is not new, but it needs to be made use of. A similar motive belongs to subordinate forms of egoism, the obstinacy of a man who may be so vexed by contradiction as to drive one into despair, and who under proper treatment becomes valuable. This I learned mainly from my old butler, a magnificent, honest soldier, a figure out of a comedy, but endowed with inexorable obstinacy against which my skill for a long time availed nothing. As often as I proposed something with regard to some intended piece of work or alteration, I got the identical reply, "It won't do, sir." Finally, I got hold of a list and worked my plan. "Simon, this will now be done as Simon recently said it should be done, namely." At this he looked at me, tried to think when he had said this thing, and went and did it. And in spite of frequent application, this list has not failed once for some years. What is best about it is that it will serve, mutatis mutandis, with criminals. As soon as ever real balkiness is noted, it becomes necessary to avoid the least appearance of contradictoriness, since that increases difficulties. It is not necessary to lie or to make use of trickery. Only avoid direct contradiction, drop the subject in question, and return to it indirectly when you perceive that the obstinate individual recognizes his error. Then you may succeed in building him a golden bridge, or at least a barely visible side door where he can make his retreat unnoticed. In that case, even the most difficult of obstinates will no longer repeat the old story. He will repeat only if he is pressed, and this although he is repeatedly brought back to the point. If, however, the matter is once decided, beware of returning to it without any other reason, save to confirm the settled matter quite completely. That would be only to wake the sleeper, to give him a sleeping powder. Speaking generally, the significant rule is this: egoism, laziness, and conceit are the only human motives on which one may unconditionally depend. Love, loyalty, honesty, religion, and patriotism, though firm as a rock, may lapse and fall. A man might have been counted on for one of these qualities 10 times with safety, and on the 11th he might collapse like a house of cards. Count on egoism and laziness 100 or 1,000 times, and they are as firm as ever. More simply, count on egoism, for laziness and conceit are only modifications of egoism. The latter alone then should be the one human motive to keep in mind when dealing with men. There are cases enough when all the wheels are set in motion after a clue to the truth, i.e., when there is danger that the person under suspicion is innocent. Appeals to honor, conscience, humanity, and religion fail, but run the complete gamut of self-love and the whole truth rings clear. Egoism is the best criterion of the presence of veracity. Suppose a coherent explanation has been painfully constructed. It is obvious that the correctness of the construction is studied with reference to the given motive. Now, if the links in the chain reach easily back to the motive, there is at least the possibility that the chain is free of error. What then of the motive? If it is noble, friendship, love, humaneness, loyalty, mercy, the constructed chain may be correct, and happily is so oftener than is thought, but it need not be correct. If, however, the structure rests on egoism in any of its innumerable forms, and if it is logically sound, then the whole case is explained utterly and reliably. The construction is indubitably correct. Section: Secrets. The determination of the truth at law would succeed much less frequently than it does if it were not for the fact that men find it very difficult to keep secrets. This essentially notable and not clearly understood circumstance is popularly familiar. Proverbs of all people deal with it and point mainly to the fact that keeping secrets is especially difficult for women. The Italians say a woman who may not speak is in danger of bursting. The Germans, that the burden of secrecy affects her health and ages her prematurely. The English say similar things, still more coarsely. Classical proverbs have dealt with the issue. Numberless fairy tales, narratives, novels, and poems have portrayed the difficulty of silence, and one very fine modern novel, Die Last des Schweigens by Ferdinand Kernberger, has chosen this fact for its principal motive. The universal difficulty of keeping silence is expressed by Lotze in the dictum that we learn expression very young and silence very late. The fact is of use to the criminalist not only in regard to criminals, but also with regard to witnesses who, for one reason or another, want to keep something back. The latter is the source of a good deal of danger, inasmuch as the witness is compelled to speak and circles around the secret in question without touching it until he points it out and half reveals it. If he stops there, the matter requires consideration, for a half-truth is worse than a whole lie. The latter reveals its subject and intent and permits of defense, while the half-truth may, by association and circumscriptive limitations, cause vexatious errors both as regards the identity of the semi-accused and as regards the circumstances with which he is thus involved. For this reason, the criminalist must consider the question of secrets carefully. As for his own silence, this must be considered in both directions. That he is not to blab official secrets is so obvious that it need not be spoken of. Such blabbing is so negligent and dishonorable that we must consider it intrinsically impossible. But it not infrequently happens that some indications are dropped or persuaded out of a criminal judge, generally out of one of the younger and more eager men. They mention only the event itself, and not a name, nor a place, nor a particular time, nor some even more intimate matter. There seems no harm done. And yet the most important points have often been blabbed of in just such a way. And what is worst of all, just because the speaker has not known the name nor anything else concrete, the issue may be diverted and enmesh some guiltless person. It is worth considering that the effort above mentioned is made only in the most interesting cases, that crimes especially move people to disgusting interest. Due to the fact that there is a more varied approach to synthesis of a case when the same story is repeated several times or by various witnesses. For by such means, extrapolations and combinations of the material are made possible. By way of warning, let me remind you of an ancient and much quoted anecdote, first brought to light by Boccaccio. A young and much loved abbé was teased by a bevy of ladies to narrate what had happened in the first confession he had experienced. After long hesitation, the young fellow decided that it was no sin to relate the confessed sin if he suppressed the name of the confessor, and so he told the ladies that his first confession was of infidelity. A few minutes later, a couple of tardy guests appeared, a marquise and his charming wife. Both reproached the young priest for his infrequent visits at their home. The marquise exclaimed so that everybody heard, "It is not nice of you to neglect me, your first confessé." This squib is very significant for our profession, for it is well known how, in the same way, bare facts, as completely safe, are carried further. The listener does not have to combine them. The facts combine themselves by means of others otherwise acquired, and finally the most important official matters, on the concealment of which much may perhaps have depended, become universally known. Official secrets have a general significance, and must therefore be guarded at all points and not merely in detail. The second direction, in which the criminal justice must maintain zero silence, looks toward witnesses and accused. If, in the first instance, the cause of too much communicativeness was an overproneness to talk, its cause in this case is a certain conceit that teases one into talking. Whether the justice wants to show the accused how much he already knows, or how correctly he has drawn his conclusions, whether he wishes to impress the witness by his confidences, he may do equally as much harm in one case as in the other. Any success is made especially impossible if the judge has been in too much of a hurry and tried to show himself fully informed at the very beginning, but has brought out instead some error. The accused naturally leaves him with his false suppositions. They suggest things to the witness, and what follows may be easily considered. Correct procedure in such circumstances is difficult. Never to reveal what is already known is to deprive oneself of one of the most important means of examination. Use of it, therefore, ought not to be belated. But it is much worse to be premature or garrulous. In my own experience, I have never been sorry for keeping silence, especially if I had already said something. The only rule in the matter is comparatively self-evident. Never move toward any incorrectness, and never present the appearance of knowing more than you actually do. Setting aside the dishonesty of such a procedure, the danger of a painful exposure in such matters is great. There is still another great danger which one may beware of, optima fide, the danger of knowing something untrue. This danger also is greatest for the greatest talent and the greatest courage among us, because they are the readiest hands at synthesis, inference, and definition of possibilities, and see as indubitable and shut to contradiction things that at best are mere possibilities. It is indifferent to the outcome whether a lie has been told purposely, or whether it has been the mere honest explosion of an over-sanguine temperament. It is therefore unnecessary to point out the occasion for caution. One need only suggest that something may be learned from people who talk too much. The over-communicativeness of a neighbor is quickly noticeable, and if the why and how much of it are carefully studied out, it is not difficult to draw a significant analogy for one's own case. In the matter of secrets of other people, obviously the thing to be established first is what is actually a secret, what is to be suppressed if one is to avoid damage to self or another. When an actual secret is recognized, it is necessary to consider whether the damage is greater through keeping or through revealing the secret. If it is still possible, it is well to let the secret be, There is always damage, and generally not insignificant damage, when it is tortured out of a witness. If, however, one is honestly convinced that the secret must be revealed, as when a guiltless person is endangered, every effort and all skill is to be applied in the revelation. Inasmuch as the least echo of bad faith is here impossible, the job is never easy. The chief rule is not to be overeager in getting at the desired secret. The more important it is, the less ought to be made of it. It is best not directly to lead for it. It will appear of itself, especially if it is important. Many a fact which the possessor had set no great store by has been turned into a carefully guarded secret by means of the eagerness with which it was sought. In cases of need, when every other means has failed, it may not be too much to tell the witness, cautiously of course, rather more of the crime than might otherwise have seemed good. Then those episodes must be carefully hit on, which cluster about the desired secret and from which its importance arises. If the witness understands that he presents something really important by giving up his secret, surprising consequences ensue. The relatively most important secret is that of one's own guilt, and the associated most suggestive establishment of it, the confession, is a very extraordinary psychological problem. In many cases, the reasons for confession are very obvious. The criminal sees that the evidence is so complete that he is soon to be convicted and seeks a mitigation of the sentence by confession, or he hopes through a more honest narration of the crime to throw a great degree of the guilt on another. In addition, there is a thread of vanity in confession, as among young peasants who confess to a greater share in a burglary than they actually had, easily discoverable by the magniloquent manner of describing their actual crime. Then there are confessions made for the sake of care and winter lodgings, the confession arising from firm conviction, as among political criminals and others. There are even confessions arising from nobility, from the wish to save an intimate, and confessions intended to deceive, and such as occur especially in conspiracy and are made to gain time, either for the flight of the real criminal or for the destruction of compromising objects. Generally, in the latter case, guilt is admitted only until the plan for which it was made has succeeded. Then the judge is surprised with well-founded, regular, and successful establishment of an alibi. Not infrequently, confession of small crimes is made to establish an alibi for a greater one. And finally, there are the confessions Catholics are required to make in confessional, and the deathbed confessions. The first are distinguished by the fact that they are made freely, and that the confessee does not try to mitigate his crime, but is aiming to make amends, even when he finds it hard, and desires even a definite penance. Deathbed confessions may indeed have religious grounds, or the desire to prevent the punishment or the further punishment of an innocent person. Although this list of explicable confession types is long, it is in no way exhaustive. It is only a small portion of all the confessions that we receive. Of these, the greater part remain more or less unexplained. Mittermeier has already dealt with these acutely, and cites examples as well as the relatively well-studied older literature of the subject. A number of cases may perhaps be explained through pressure of conscience, especially where there are involved hysterical or nervous persons who are plagued with vengeful images in which the ghost of their victim would appear, or in whose ear the unendurable clang of the stolen money never ceases, etc. If the confessor only intends to free himself from these disturbing images and the consequent punishment by means of confession, we are not dealing with what is properly called conscience, but more or less with disease, with an abnormally excited imagination. But where such hallucinations are lacking, and religious influences are absent, and the confession is made freely in response to mere pressure, we have a case of conscience, another of those terms which need explanation. I know of no analogy in the inner nature of man in which anybody with open eyes does himself exclusive harm without any contingent use being apparent, as is the case in this class of confession. There is always considerable difficulty in explaining these cases. One way of explaining them is to say that their source is mere stupidity and impulsiveness, or simply to deny their occurrence. But the theory of stupidity does not appeal to the practitioner, for even if we agree that a man foolishly makes a confession and later, when he perceives his mistake, bitterly regrets telling it, we still find many confessions that are not regretted, and the makers of which can in no wise be accused of defective intelligence. To deny that there are such is comfortable but wrong, because we each know collections of cases in which no effort could bring to light a motive for the confession. The confession was made because the confessor wanted to make it, and that's the whole story. The making of a confession, according to laymen, ends the matter, but really, the judge's work begins with it. As a matter of caution, all statutes approve confessions as evidence only when they agree completely with the other evidence. Confession is a means of proof, and not proof. Some objective, evidentially concurrent support and confirmation of the confession is required. But the same legal requirement necessitates that the value of the concurrent evidence shall depend on its having been arrived at and established independently. The existence of a confession contains powerful, suggestive influences for judge, witness, expert, for all concerned in the case. If a confession is made, all that is perceived in the case may be seen in the light of it, and experience teaches well enough how that alters the situation. There is so strong an inclination to pigeonhole and adapt everything perceived in some given explanation that the explanation is strained after, and facts are squeezed and trimmed until they fit easily. It is a remarkable phenomenon, confirmable by all observers, that all our perceptions are at first soft and plastic, and easily take form according to the shape of their predecessors. They become stiff and inflexible only when we have had them for some time, and have permitted them to reach an equilibrium. If, then, observations are made in accord with certain notions, the plastic material is easily molded, excrescences and unevenness are squeezed away, lacunae are filled up, and if it is at all possible, the adaptation is completed easily. Then, if a new and quite different notion arises in us, the alteration of the observed material occurs as easily again, and only long afterwards, when the observation has hardened, do fresh alterations fail. This is a matter of daily experience, in our professional as well as in our ordinary affairs. We hear of a certain crime and consider the earliest data. For one reason or another, we begin to suspect A as the criminal. The result of an examination of the premises is applied in each detail to this proposition. It fits. So does the autopsy. So do the depositions of the witnesses. Everything fits. There have indeed been difficulties, but they have been set aside. They are attributed to inaccurate observation and the like. The point is that the evidence is against A. Now suppose that soon after B confesses the crime, this event is so significant that it sets aside at once all the earlier reasons for suspecting A, and the theory of the crime involves B. Naturally, the whole material must now be applied to B, and in spite of the fact that it at first fitted A, it does now fit B. Here again difficulties arise, but they are to be set aside just as before. Now, if this is possible with evidence, written and thereby unalterable, how much more easily can it be done with testimony about to be taken, which may readily be colored by the already presented confession? The educational conditions involve now the judge and his assistants on the one hand, and the witnesses on the other. Concerning himself, the judge must continually remember that his business is not to fit all testimony to the already furnished confession, allowing the evidence to serve as mere decoration to the latter, but that it is his business to establish his proof by means of the confession and by means of the other evidence, independently. The legislators of contemporary civilization have started with the proper presupposition that also false confessions are made, and who of us has not heard such confessions for whatever reason, because the confessor wants to die, because he is diseased, because he wants to free the real criminal, can be discovered as false only by showing their contradiction with the other evidence. If, however, the judge only fits the evidence, he abandons this means of getting the truth. Nor must false confessions be supposed to occur only in case of homicide. They occur most numerously in cases of importance where more than one person is involved. It happens perhaps that only one or two are captured, and they assume all the guilt, e.g., in cases of larceny, brawls, rioting, etc. I repeat, the suggestive power of a confession is great, and it is hence really not easy to exclude its influence and to consider the balance of the evidence on its merits, but this must be done if one is not to deceive oneself. Dealing with the witness is still more ticklish, inasmuch as to the difficulties with them is added the difficulties with oneself. The simplest thing would be to deny the existence of a confession, and thus to get the witness to speak without prejudice. But aside from the fact of its impossibility as a lie, each examination of a witness would have to be a comedy, and that would in many cases be impossible, as the witness might already know that the accused had confessed. The only thing to be done, especially when it is permissible for other reasons, is to tell the witness that a confession exists and to call to his attention that it is not yet evidence. And finally, and above all, to keep one's head and to prevent the witness from presenting his evidence from the point of view of the already established. In this regard, it cannot be sufficiently demonstrated that the coloring of a true bill comes much less from the witness than from the judge. The most excited witness can be brought by the judge to a sober and useful point of view, and conversely, the most calm witness may utter the most misleading testimony if the judge abandons in any way the safe bottom of the indubitably established fact. Very intelligent witnesses, they are not confined to the educated classes, may be dealt with constructively and be told after their depositions that the case is to be considered as if there were no confession whatever. There is an astonishing number of people, especially among the peasants, who are amenable to such considerations and willingly follow if they are led on with confidence. In such a case it is necessary to analyze the testimony into its elements. This analysis is most difficult and important, since it must be determined what, taken in itself, is an element, materially, not formally, and what merely appears to be a unit. Suppose that during a great brawl a man was stabbed, and that A confesses to the stabbing. Now a witness testified that A had first uttered a threat, then had jumped into the brawl, felt in his bag, and left the crowd, and that in the interval between A's entering and leaving, the stabbing occurred. In this simple case, the various incidents must be evaluated, and each must be considered by itself. So we consider, suppose A had not confessed, what would the threat have counted for? Might it not have been meant for the assailants of the injured man? May his feeling in the bag not be interpreted in another fashion? Must he have felt for a knife only? Was there time enough to open it and to stab? Might the man not have been already wounded by that time? We might then conclude that all the evidence about A contained nothing against him, But if we relate it to the confession, then this evidence is almost equal to direct evidence of A's crime. But if individual sense perceptions are mingled with conclusions, and if other equivalent perceptions have to be considered, which occurred perhaps to other people, then the analysis is hardly so simple, yet it must be made. In dealing with less intelligent people, with whom this construction cannot be performed, one must be satisfied with general rules. By demanding complete accuracy and insisting, in any event, on the ratio sciendi, one may generally succeed in turning a perception uncertain with regard to any individual into a trustworthy one with regard to the confessor. It happens comparatively seldom that untrue confessions are discovered, but once this does occur, and the trouble is taken to subject the given evidence to a critical comparison, the manner of adaptation of the evidence to the confession may easily be discovered. The witnesses were altogether unwilling to tell any falsehood, and the judge was equally eager to establish the truth. Nevertheless, the issue must have received considerable perversion in order to fix the guilt on the confessor. Such examinations are so instructive that the opportunity to make them should never be missed. All the testimony presents a typical picture. The evidence is consistent with the theory that the real confessor was guilty, but it is also consistent with the theory that the real criminal was guilty, but some details must be altered, often very many. If there is an opportunity to hear the same witnesses again, the procedure becomes still more instructive. The witnesses, supposing they want honestly to tell the truth, naturally confirm the evidence as it points to the second, more real criminal, and if an explanation is asked for the statements that pointed to the confessor, the answers make it indubitably evident that their incorrectness came as without intention. The circumstance that a confession had been made acted as a suggestion. Conditions similar to confessional circumstances arise when other types of persuasive evidence are gathered, which have the same impressive influence as confessions. In such cases, the judge's task is easier than the witnesses, since he need not tell them of evidence already at hand. How very much people allow themselves to be influenced by antecedent grounds of suspicion is a matter of daily observation. One example will suffice. An intelligent man was attacked at night and wounded. On the basis of his description, an individual was arrested. On the next day, the suspect was brought before the man for identification. He identified the man with certainty, but inasmuch as his description did not quite hit off the suspect, he was asked the reason for his certainty. "Oh, you certainly would not have brought him here if he were not the right man," was the astonishing reply. Simply because the suspect was arrested on the story of the wounded man and brought before him in prison garb, the latter thought he saw such corroboration for his data as to make the identification certain, a puristeron proteron, which did not at all occur to him in connection with the vivid impression of what he saw. I believe that to keep going with merely what the criminalist knows about the matter belongs to his most difficult tasks. Section G. Interest. Anybody who means to work honestly must strive to awaken and to sustain the interest of his collaborators. A judge's duty is to present his associates material, well arranged, systematic, and exhaustive, but not redundant, and to be himself well and minutely informed concerning the case. Whoever so proceeds may be certain in even the most ordinary and simplest cases of the interest of his colleagues, hence of their attention, and in consequence of the best in their power. These are essentially self-evident propositions. In certain situations, however, more is asked with regard to the experts. The expert, whether a very modest workman or very renowned scholar, must in the first instance become convinced of the judge's complete interest in his work, of the judge's power to value the effort and knowledge it requires, of the fact that he does not question and listen merely because the law requires it, and finally of the fact that the judge is endowed, so far as may be, with a definite comprehension of the expert's task. However conscientiously and intensely the expert may apply himself to his problem, it will be impossible to work at it with real interest if he finds no cooperation, no interest, and no understanding among those for whom he, at least formally, is at work. We may be certain that the paucity of respect we get from the scientific representatives of other disciplines, let us be honest, such is the case, comes particularly from those relations we have with them as experts, relations in which they find us so unintelligent and so indifferent with regard to matters of importance. If the experts speak of us with small respect, and the attitude spreads and becomes general, we get only our full due. Nobody can require of a criminal judge profound knowledge of all other disciplines besides his own. The experts supply that, but the judge certainly must have some insight into them in so far as they affect his own work, if he is not to meet the expert unintelligent and unintelligible, and if he is to cooperate with and succeed in appraising the expert's work. In a like fashion, the judge may be required to take interest in the expert's result. If the judge receives their report and sticks to the statutes, if he never shows that he was anxious about their verdict and merely views it as a number, it is no wonder that in the end the expert also regards his work as a mere number and loses interest. No man is interested in a thing unless it is made interesting, and the expert is no exception. Naturally, no one would say that the judge should pretend interest. That would be worst of all. He must be possessed of it, or he will not do for a judge. But interest may be intensified and vitalized. If the judge perceives that the finding of the experts is very important for his case, he must at least meet them with interest in it. If that is present, he will read their reports attentively, will note that he does not understand some things, and ask the experts for elucidation. One question gives rise to another. One answer after another causes understanding, and understanding implies an ever-increasing interest. It never happens that there should be difficulties because of a request to judicial experts to explain things to the judge. I have never met any in my own practice, and have never heard any complaints. On the contrary, pleasure and efficiency are generally noticeable in such connections, and the state, above all, is the gainer. The simple explanation lies here in the fact that the expert is interested in his profession, interested in just that concrete way in which the incomparably greater number of jurists are not. And this again is based upon a sad fact for us. The chemist, the physician, etc., studies his subject because he wants to become a chemist, physician, etc., but the lawyer studies law not because he wants to become a lawyer, but because he wants to become an official. And as he has no especial interest, he chooses his state position in that branch in which he thinks he has the best prospects. It is a bitter truth and a general rule that those who want to study law and the science of law are the exceptions, and that hence we have to acquire a real interest in our subject from laymen, from our experts. But the interest can be acquired, and with the growth of interest there is growth of knowledge, and therewith increase of pleasure in the work itself, and hence success. The most difficult problem in interest is arousing the interest of witnesses, because this is purely a matter of training. Receiving the attention is what should be aimed at in rousing interest, inasmuch as full attention leads to correct testimony, i.e., to the thing most important to our tasks. No interest, no attention, says Volkmar. The absolutely new does not stimulate. What narrows appreciation narrows attention also. The significant thing for us is that the absolutely new does not stimulate, a matter often overlooked. If I tell an uneducated man, with all signs of astonishment, that the missing books of Tacitus' Annals have been discovered in Verona, or that a completely preserved Dinotherium has been cut out of the ice, or that the final explanation of the Martian canals has been made at Menorah Observatory, all this very interesting news will leave him quite cold. It is absolutely new to him. He does not know what it means or how to get hold of it. It offers him no matter of interest. I should have a similar experience if, in the course of a big case, I told a man, educated but uninterested in the case, with joy, that I had finally discovered the important note on which the explanation of the events depended. I could not possibly expect interest, attention, and comprehension of a matter if my interlocutor knows nothing about the issue or the reason of the note's importance. And in spite of the fact that everything is natural and can be explained, we have the same story every day. We put the witness a definite question that is of immense importance to us, who are fully acquainted with the problem, but is for the witness detached, incoherent, and therefore barren of interest. Then, who can require of an uninterested witness attention and effective and well-considered replies? I myself heard a witness answer a judge who asked him about the weather on a certain day. "Look here, to drag me so many miles to this place in order to discuss the weather with me, that's..." The old man was quite right, because the detached question had no particular purpose. But when it was circumstantially explained to him that the weather was of uttermost significance in this case, how it was related thereto, and how important his answer would be, he went at the question eagerly zero and did everything thinkable in trying to recall the weather in question by bringing to bear various associated events, and did finally make a decidedly valuable addition to the evidence. And this is the only way to capture the attention of a witness. If he is merely ordered to pay attention, the result is the same as if he were ordered to speak louder. He does it, in lucky cases, for a moment, and then goes on as before. Attention may be generated but not commanded, and may be generated successfully with everybody, and at all times, if only the proper method is hit upon. The first and absolute requirement is to have and to show the same interest oneself. For it is impossible to infect a man with interest when you have no interest to infect with. There is nothing more deadly or boresome than to see how witnesses are examined sleepily and with tedium, and how the witnesses, similarly infected, similarly answer. On the other hand, it is delightful to observe the surprising effect of questions asked and heard with interest. Then the sleepiest witnesses, even dull ones, wake up. The growth of their interest, and hence of their attention, may be followed step by step. They actually increase in knowledge, and their statements gain in reliability. And this simply because they have seen the earnestness of the judge, the importance of the issue, the case, the weighty consequences of making a mistake, the gain in truth through watchfulness and effort, the avoidance of error through attention. In this way, the most useful testimony can be obtained from witnesses who, in the beginning, showed only despairing prospects. Now, if one is already himself endowed with keen interest and resolved to awaken the same in the witnesses, it is necessary carefully to consider the method of so doing, and how much the witness is to be told of what has already been established, or merely been said and received as possibly valuable. On the one hand, it is true that the witness can be roused to attention and to more certain and vigorous responses according to the quantity of detail told him. On the other, caution and other considerations warn against telling an unknown witness whose trustworthiness is not ascertained delicate and important matters. It is especially difficult if the witness is to be told of presuppositions and combinations, or if he is to be shown how the case would alter with his own answer. The last especially has the effect of suggestion, and must occur in particular and in general at those times alone when his statement, or some part of it, is apparently of small importance, but actually of much. Often this importance can be made clear to the witness only by showing him that the difference in the effect of his testimony is pointed out to him, because when he sees it, he will find it worthwhile to exert himself and to consider carefully his answer. Any one of us may remember that a witness who was ready with a prompt and to him an indifferent reply started thinking and gave an essentially different answer, even contradictory to his first, when the meaning and the effect of what he might say was made clear to him. How and when the witness is to be told things, there is no rule for. The wise adjustment between saying enough to awaken interest and not too much to cause danger is a very important question of tact. Only one certain device may be recommended. It is better to be careful with a witness during his preliminary examination and to keep back what is known or suspected. Thus, the attention and interest of the witness may perhaps be stimulated. If, however, it is believed that fuller information may increase and intensify the important factors under examination, the witness is to be recalled later when it is safe, and his testimony is, under the new conditions of interest, to be corrected and rendered more useful. In this case, too, the key to success lies in increase of effort. But that is true in all departments of law, and the interest of a witness is so important that it is worth the effort.